Welcome, friends. See a lot of familiar faces here. I guess we can omit the preliminaries. So you've all heard me say many times that one of the most powerful observations to make that reveals very directly what is actually going on here is the fact that experiential qualities by their very nature are unresolvable, indefinable, or you could say infinite. Now, I've always struggled with a clear way to put this, and I've never arrived at it. But on Monday, yesterday, in the course of a teleconference, I happened onto a way of putting it that I think makes it much. It's not precise, but I think it makes it much, much clearer. So let's take an example. So it's example time. So suppose you're looking at a painting, and for the sake of extremity and absurdity, let's say the painting appears to be a painting of something horrific, like, let's say, Nazi soldiers machine gunning women and children, or something like that. Let's just suppose it's a painting like that. It's some twisted person or some person who's making a point painted this horrific painting that looks like, these soldiers with these looks of hate on their face, machine gunning these helpless women and children, okay? And so there's this painting sitting there. Now suppose you look more closely at the painting, and you notice that the painting's actually pointillist. So when you look very, very closely, you notice that there's actually no Nazi soldiers, no women, no babies. There's a bunch of little dots. And you look more closely at the dots, and you notice they're all happy faces. So what's a painting is a painting of happy faces, happy face dots. But then if you see it in a certain context, it looks like something else. So, and it's not that it is happy faces, or it is soldiers machine gunning helpless people. It's neither. It's a condition of ambiguity that can be seen as the one and can be seen as the other. Suppose you look more closely at one of the dots, you look more closely at one of the happy faces, and it is actually made up of a bunch of other little dots. And suppose those dots are something entirely different, like a bust of George Washington or something, God knows what. And so, and you look at all the other happy faces, they're all the same thing. So it's actually, the painting, there's actually no happy faces there. There's actually no soldiers and women and children. They're all just busts of George Washington. But suppose you look more closely at the bust of George Washington, and suppose they're all made up of dots, and each one of those dots is made up of something else, say, a longhand depiction of of some political manifesto or something. And every single dot is made up of this. And so when you look closely, the entire painting consists of nothing but minute renditions of this political manifesto. And there's no happy faces, there's no bust of George Washington, there's no soldiers shooting people. So you see where this is going? And suppose you back up. You've been looking at this painting of the soldiers shooting women, and you discover all this incredible detail, which is completely, which it consists of, and it's actually entirely other than what it seems to be on that level of observation. Suppose you back up away from the painting, and you notice there's other paintings on the wall, and you notice that those paintings actually form dots that are forming another image. Any image, doesn't matter what it is. It can be absurd again and specify something. You see where this is going?
Chef Boyardee.
Yeah, Chef Boyardee. A Campbell soup can. Okay, it's a Campbell soup can. And so it can seem to be a Campbell soup can, but it isn't. It can seem to be soldiers machine gunning women and children, but it isn't. It can seem to be happy faces, but it isn't. It can seem to be, I forgot what I said, but it isn't, and so on and so forth. And the point is, this never ends. So there is nothing that it is, because anything that it seems to be is just a way of seeing it, And if you look closely, you'll discover that it's actually something entirely other than that, completely. Now, this example is not accurate perfectly mainly because it uses scale. It uses size. You have to look closer. You have to look smaller, and you have to look larger. And the way experience works this way, experience does work like that. I mean, we all know this. You look at your hand, and it's a hand. You look closer, and it's like cells. You look closer, and it's molecules. You look closer, and it's atoms. Blah blah blah. Where'd the hand go? Well, there's no hand. It's just atoms or molecules or whatever it is. Whatever scale of observation you're looking at it on appears to be. But it's not just that. It's also all the other layers of observation, because there's no hierarchy. It's not like it's really atoms and everything else is untrue, because the atoms, if you look closely, aren't really there either. They're just quarks or whatever. And no doubt when we can look at quarks better, there's not going to be a quark set. It's going to be whatever the quarks are made of, and so on and so forth. So it obviously applies in terms of scale, size, dimension. But experience is weirder than that. Experience also, not just from size of smallness and largeness, zooming in and zooming out, but also just from what something seems to be, it can simultaneously have flavors or seemings that are inconsistent with each other, just in experience. And but the analogy of this, I think, really communicates this subtle idea more directly than any example that I've come up with previously. So the point being that what spiritual bondage consists of, the sole problem that can exist here, what it consists of is thinking you know what's going on. Now, and the basis for that is experience is highly patterned. It's infinitely patterned, obviously. I mean, there's all these shapes and colors and so on and so forth in the visual field and everything else in their corresponding aspects of experience. And on the basis of all of this patterning, the intelligence draws inferences. Well, there's these shapes, and so maybe these shapes correspond to objects. There's these sounds, so maybe they correspond to words. And so, based on these inferences, extrapolated from all this intense patterning that shows up in experience, the intelligence erects a hypothesis. Okay, maybe I am an individual. Maybe I'm an entity. Maybe I'm existing in an objective space-time world. Maybe there's other entities in this world. Maybe there's other objects in this world. Maybe I'm interacting with them. Maybe there's cause and effect. Maybe there's dependency. Maybe there's potential threats, dangers. Maybe there's things to worry about, things to hope for. And all of a sudden you have all the normal human perspective, the normal human frame of reference that most people live in, and all of which is fine as a hypothesis. But the problem is, what happens typically is people forget that it's a hypothesis. They think that it really is true. It really is like that. It may be like that, but it's just a theory erected on the basis of all this patterning. We erect the same theory when we're dreaming. When we're dreaming, there's all this pattern, and we assume that there's people there and things, and we're doing things and acting and running around and doing all this stuff, right? But of course, when we wake up, we realize, there was nothing there, so I was wrong. The same thing happens, or would happen, when we go to sleep. All this stuff, all these patterns disappear, and if we had enough self-awareness, we would go, oh, I was wrong. But we don't have the self-awareness because, of course, when you sleep, your analytical consciousness is shut down. So there's no processing there to reflect, to draw the inference of, well, wait a minute, where did all that stuff go? Now, the point isn't whether things are or aren't a certain way. The point is that the consciousness interprets the patterns of its experience in such a way and gets so caught up in the urgency of relating to those patterns, i.e. relating to oneself, one's life, one's history, one's position in the world, the urgencies of what one has to do to defend that and protect it and take care of business and so on and so forth. One gets so caught up in that fills the awareness and basically awareness of the basic situation, which is the astounding fact of experience, the astounding fact of the actual apparition of all of these qualities that show up as patterns, the actual apparition of this astounding faculty of perception, of knowing, that spontaneously and effortlessly and transparently and completely assimilates all of that in real time, is completely ignored, is taken for granted. It's bypassed entirely through the urgency of the absorption with the soap opera, with the problems, with my problems, as opposed to, well, wait a minute, but what's this? What is this that's here? And it turns out that what this is that is here has never gone away, of course. Here it is. And what it is astounding, is inconceivable, is essentially miraculous and transcendental in its very nature. And the perceiving faculty is likewise astounding and miraculous and transcendental in its very nature. And there's nothing else present. So, if there's a you, it is this. It is this miraculous perceiving faculty. It is this miraculous apparition, this ongoing dream. And seeing that fact as it is casts one's sense of oneself, casts one's sense of what is going on here in a drastically different light, with drastically different implications than the normal implications that arise from the usual horror show being an individual human in this shitty world we live in. And to go back to the point I started with of unresolvability, that you can't really tell when anything is. You know, is it soldiers shooting women? Is it happy faces? Is it busts of George Washington? You know? Well, it can be seen as any of those if you look at it from a certain perspective, but it's not finally any of those. And there's no final, because the closer you look, the more you look in, you find something completely different and contradictory that turns out to be everything, and you look out, you find something equally different and contradictory that also turns out to be everything, turns out to be comprehensive. So it's all equally true, but it's all mutually exclusive, and none of it fits together. It doesn't resolve. It doesn't come together into coherence. And this is the nature of patterns. All of these patterns, this infinite patterning that your experience consists of, is actual, but it is unresolvable. You can't say what any pattern is, because it reveals infinite different aspects depending upon how it is seen. And since all of this, since the problem, which is erecting all these hypotheses of interpretation and building a world that one assumes is a certain way, is based upon interpreting these patterns as actually consisting of being a certain thing, when you see conclusively that in actuality the patterns cannot be clearly interpreted as being any particular way, because they are equally other ways, drastically other ways, in the same pattern. And when you see this very directly, then that completely pulls the plug on this whole mechanism, on this whole obsession and absorption in all of this interpreting. You know, interpretations are just hypotheses. And one sees this directly, one discovers freedom, because at that point you're free of your life, you're free of your body, you're free of history, you're free of space and time, because all of these are just theories. And the theories are erected on this miraculous presence that is always present exactly as it is, completely unexplainably, why is there experience? What's doing the experience? So that's my talk for tonight. And Michael?
So I happened to pull this out last week or so. I actually did it because this is not related to the question, but I'll tell you why I retrieved this from my library. The teacher, the ripple-shaped Kelsing Gyatso, went renegading both from the main body of the Galupa, and there's quite a bit of tension. And so,
good for him.
Galupa, acquaintance of mine told me I should burn it. I don't think. I actually want to loan it to you. You can do, or give it to you. You can do whatever with it. But anyway, this is it's called Clear Light of Bliss. It's Mahamudra in Vajrayana Buddhism.
Nice title.
It's all about Tantra, and it's extremely complex. It goes way over my head about the winds and the drops in the channels and the different strata of mind. It's saying that the dualistic conceptions arise in gross and subtle ways based on the inner energetic configuration.
Right.
And that they're calling the mind the clear light, the most subtle strata of mind.
Right.
And that is fully recognized and stable. That is basically
right.
waiting.
Well, it's always stable. It may not be recognized, but it's always there. I mean, it's just that's parallel to what I was just talking about. The miraculous knowing faculty, and simultaneously or concurrently, all this miraculous show or display of qualities of energies is exactly that. Is the absolutely pure, absolutely subtle clear light in itself. And I agree with that. I mean, I wouldn't codify it in terms of the channels and the drops and the winds and all that stuff too specifically like the Tibetans do, but it's essentially the same thing. Experientially, it has to do with how you hold your energy, how you could say how you sit or where you sit or what you imagine to be the structure within this energy field that is actual, that you consist of. And there is actually no structure. And that's the pure clear light. But, or let's say there's an inherent structure, which is essentially no structure because it may as well be. Right? But what creates all of the more coarse structure that is the problem, so to speak, is the imagination. And this, I was putting this in subjective terms in this talk as the interpretations, the projections, the beliefs, and the interpretive frameworks that are erected in imagination that interpret what this is. Basically, what those consist of is subtle energy structures that are held in mind, in imagination, which is mind, which is a subtle energy system. It's your subtle energy body. And as these structures are held and maintained, it's not that they're not there, they're just being oriented to, which reifies them, makes them seem solid. It's sort of like clouds in the sky. Clouds are there, but they aren't solid. But if you suppose that they're solid, then all of a sudden the sky becomes very opaque and full of all these heavy-handed things. And so, I was talking about that in terms of patterning. Experiential patterning is infinitely fine, but it has no substance. But when the imagination attributes substance to all this patterning, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. In terms of the belief system, in terms of the mind, since it's all just mental patterns anyway, it's basically, you can think of it as being subjective in the sense that it's just imaginary. But as soon as it's held to be that way, that solidifies it effectively for the experiencing consciousness.
Well, it's really interesting because, and I've heard this, other Vajrayana, from other Tibetan tantric sources, they describe a central channel that's connected to the heart, and the most subtle, the red and the white drops, which are split when a being is at conception, or at birth, I forget.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that whole theory and stuff.
Anyways, so the flowing of energy away from the central channel into the right and left channel that correspond to the dualistic fixation, to the ordinary karmic movement.
And that is analogous to the distraction of attention from the primary field of infinitely subtle transcendental clear light into all of these projections. They're one and the same. It's just another way of putting the same thing. That's putting it in terms of a kind of a pseudo-physiology. But it's exactly the same thing. It's the same event.
I bring this up not just as intellectual entertainment or anything like that.
Sure.
Specific question. So,
yeah.
In what could be called Sutra, Mahamudra, or I guess so, Chen, which, as you pointed out, was not always synonymous with Vajrayana Tantra.
Right.
Valpo, it existed before.
Right.
Or quite simply, approaching it formlessly without specifically meditating on the channels and all this. You read it, you'll see it's extremely complex.
Right.
You have to intentionally dissolve the drops and then.
Yeah, I've seen systems that approach it in those terms.
Yeah. Would meditating on radiance or formless attention to the inquiry into that which is beyond conception, without any specific manipulation, would it accomplish the same?
Yes, and let me explain to you why. The one essential ingredient in realization in this yoga is direct energy engagement. It must occur. Of course, it's already occurring through experience, but noticing it is engaging with it, as opposed to not noticing it, where it is actually being engaged with it, but it's very automatic and essentially not particularly productive. But any kind of, as you call it, inquiry, or being with radiance, if you try to be with radiance, you will go to radiance at essentially the coarsest level that you are, or let's just say you're at the cutting edge of your own degree of fineness, your own degree of subtlety. So you will essentially be doing the same thing. So if your energy system is habituated to resonating in a rather coarse way, then you'll come up against these drops and channels as they're putting it. Or, as I would say, you come up against these various seeming energy systems, energy patterns, energy qualities, experiential qualities which seem to show up. But by engaging them directly as energy, it's like I was saying earlier with the pictures, when you look at a picture and you go into the dots, the pixels that it's made of, and so on and so forth, exactly the same thing happens. Because the intelligence of engagement penetrates the patterns and goes and spontaneously moves into subtler and subtler levels with it. And that is what affects the yoga. That is what takes you to the primal clear light, let's say. Let's call it in those terms. Because just by engaging with the actuality of this energy, just as experience, this is just this. We're not talking about anything esoteric. It's actually incredibly, supremely esoteric, but it's also just this complete obvious stuff that's right here. Just by being with what experience is made of deliberately, with intelligence, let's say, with engagement. All this entire process of moving into progressive subtlety, of engaging it, or as they might call it, dissolving the drops and the winds and all of that, moving through the channels, what have you, withdrawing things into the central channel and so on and so forth. That's just a poetic or a schematic way of saying the same thing. But it doesn't need to look like that in terms of imagining channels and imagining these drops and imagining all this stuff as a visualization. What I propose is you just with the energies directly, without any intermediary of interpretation of an imaginative structural framework to your approach. You just let them be whatever they are, which is the more, in terms of Tibetan, is a more primal Dzogchen approach.
Did Longchenpa, did he require preliminary tantric yoga before engaging in the Mahabodhi?
I don't know. He never talked about that I'm aware of. In his Dzogchen books, he doesn't mention that, and Dzogchen himself doesn't. But again, with the Tibetans, everything is complicated and baroque because they have, all of their structures, and I think it has to do with different normalcies and different historical patterns, different historical periods.
Certainly.
I think early on, the different vehicles were much more stratified and individuated. So if you were doing Tantra, you went right into Tantra. If you were doing Dzogchen, you went right into Dzogchen. And also, Dzogchen was secret, so no one knew it existed until you were initiated into it. If you were invited into it, or you were, somehow hooked up with a Dzogchen master and started engaging that, no one else knew about it. No one else knew that it even existed. They didn't know you were doing it, and they didn't know he was a master, because it was all sort of like secret society sort of thing. It was not explicit. It wasn't all sort of institutionalized like it is these days.
And I know in some Indian traditions, like Mr. Nana Maharaj, when he was pointing out the direct, I forget, I am that,
right,
or I am, right from the get-go.
Right. Yeah. And his master, when he was hanging out with his master, he had one spiritual instruction that his master told him: "You're not what you take yourself to be. Find out what you are." That's what he told him, and this Argadata said, "Okay, cool," and he did it. So more power to him. And that's basically what we're talking about here. But basically, it's incredibly simple. It does not need all of this superstructure of process, because again, you are what you are, and if you look at it, you will come to see what it is. But there's a learning curve, because what this is very subtle, and it's also very unexpected in terms of any normal human interpretive framework. So you basically are training yourself to become sensitive to what it is by being with what it is, and it shows you what it is, and you get a sort of an ongoing progression of revelations where, oh wow, look at this is amazing, and you discover what subtle energy means. You discover what all these things mean directly, experientially, and you discover what clear light means. It's not just some wonderful sounding mythological thing. It's an actuality that exists in the way that it does. But you have to come to the real thing, or you're just playing with fantasies. You're just playing pretend. But looking at the energies of experience is the primal yoga, period. And if you look at it as radiance, it's good, because don't worry too much about what radiance means. Just, okay, so suppose this is radiance. So let me check out this radiance that this is, this phenomena, this experience, an experiential field that seems to be here, that I call my experience. if it's radiance, so what is this radiance? It is, and just like bang, you're off. That's it, just that. There's your koan, and then you just try and solve that riddle. Try and feel, okay, if this is radiance, what is it? And then you just directly engage with what is here, and you develop subtlety, because you have the capability of subtlety because you are inherently, inconceivably transcendental intelligence. You are brilliant. You are brilliance beyond brilliance because it's what you're made of. And that comes out, that rises to the occasion when it has an occasion to rise to, which the radiance gives it. See what I mean? It has a target worthy of it, so it draws out your own genius. It draws out your own subtlety by its very subtle nature.
Yeah, the Bonpo guy, open open.
Yeah.
And that Bonpo.
Yeah.
That can also, so the text that you showed me,
Yeah.
translated.
Yeah.
And he, I don't think he was dissing the Tantra, but he seemed to be saying that it was not necessary.
Yeah, it's not necessary. Any of the primal Dzogchen guys will say that it's not necessary. But, I really want to stress that. It's really, no process is necessary for this. No structure is necessary. No procedure or preliminaries this is reality. You already are reality completely. So if you're curious about what that is, check it out. Here it is. And so it's not like, okay, what do I do? Well, here it is, check it out. So what does check it out mean? It means, well, that's the ball's in your court. You figure out what check it out means, So you start poking at it and prodding at it, you dance with it, you look at it, you get pissed off at it, you just do stuff. And just by direct engagement, the very fact that you're not engaging with karmic circumstances, you're not engaging with your history of your life or what your neighbor thinks about you or something, you're just engaging with what is it that's present here. You're already bypassing the bullshit. You're bypassing the delusion.
And so, in doing that, would a natural shamatha or concentration arise apart from?
Absolutely. It does itself, and you don't need to. There's no technique or state of consciousness or clarity or shamatha or anything that needs to be maintained or achieved or created. It makes its own gravy.
The 9 stages of the 9 stages of calm abiding, which is
all of that. That's not something that occurs, and it's not something you learn to do. It's something you discover. When you're with this more subtly, its very nature is calm abiding, and so when you're with the radiance, you discover what calm abiding means, and then it becomes easy and effortless because it's not something you need to do or you need to maintain, but on the contrary, it's just a level, so-called, and it's not literally a level, but it's a level of the way this is that inherently is. So it's not like it's already being done.
How it's revealing itself.
Yeah. It's being done, and once you see that, then you're doing it. But it's not like there's a you that's doing it. You're just tuned into that aspect of it, so to speak. I mean, that's the whole nature of meditation. You don't need to meditate. If you want to be in samadhi, just go to the portion of this that is in samadhi. You want to be in deeper samadhi? Go to the portion of this that's in deeper samadhi. It's not like you need to do something. It's like changing the channel on your radio or something.
The process can actually be a distraction.
Absolutely.
You can get so caught up in the process that you never will get beyond it.
Because as soon as you create structures, you're basically creating more delusion. You're creating imaginary things that you then think you have to sort out and deal with. And if someone else supplies them for you, which people will eagerly do, you're a sucker. I mean, that's the really, really good news is nothing's necessary. There's nothing, you don't need to learn anything, you don't need to get anything, you don't need to, do anything even. Just check it out. Just look at what's happening here. It's already happening. You don't even need to make it happen. It's already happening. And you already are even you even are already checking it out. So let yourself notice that you are checking it out, because you are, and all of a sudden it's all very paradoxical. You just notice what this already is, what you've already always been doing, and you discover inconceivable transcendental reality.
But to the people who are stuck in process, that's sacrilege.
Sure.
And they're not even going to hear you because.
No, I don't care. The point is that this is available if one has the wit to avail oneself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've talked sometimes about trying to notice it could be anything, just sort of out of your normal
Sure.
field of vision. And when I've done that, I've noticed something that's interesting. Okay, first, so I look at a wall and I say, okay, that's a wall. Or I'll say, it's something like there's a light is sort of shining from a lamp behind it, okay?
Sure.
And so but pretty soon, that, that process, that is this, or that is, disappears.
Right.
And then what happens is, it's really weird. I mean, it's like I am the wall, or the wall is.
Right.
I mean, there is no separation.
Sure. And that's good noticing, because you move beyond qualification. Right. When you're with your experience and you do what I call noticing, you're basically, obviously, there's some degree of qualification that may spontaneously show up, because we're used to mind just does this effortlessly. Oh, I'm looking at a wall and there's a light shining on it and there's these grotesque Tibetan pictures all over it. How gaudy. I mean, so that sort of happens, but then just feeling the presence of this, the experiential presence of that, which is what I'm calling a wall, I'm calling pictures and calling all this stuff. But what I'm calling that is a presence, and when I look at the presence itself and feel the presence, it's amazing, because all of a sudden it's beyond qualification, and it's beyond location, it's beyond self and other, it's beyond all these other things, it's beyond all these qualifications, and not only that, but it has infinite subtlety in it. So it's kind of like I was talking about with the pixels and the pictures and all that. After a while, there's not even anything remotely like a wall or remotely like pictures, and you're just off and running. You're tripping.
Well, it's hilarious. I mean,
totally.
So I've been just sort of trying to walk around the house and just doing that. And if I just start doing it just a little bit, that whole phenomenon experience.
Yeah, this is available. It's really easy, in fact, once you see the trick of it. And that's good noticing.
But, trying to figure out exactly how it happened. I mean, I don't even particularly care anymore, how that's happening. I just
you can't.
realize, okay, I learned that. I can do this anywhere,
Sure. Well, yeah,
I won't do it in the car when I'm driving, okay? Maybe later when I get a little bit more adept.
And stop giving a shit about imaginary things like cops and accidents and stop signs. Yeah, it's like experience is an incredible richness, and qualifying it is like it's kind of like, I mean, let me think of an example. It's like, so suppose you're sitting in a room and you're not talking, and no one's talking, and someone walks into a room with you. Now, what could they say? They could say anything. Right? They could say, how about those Niners? They could start talking about Russian politics in the 19th century. They could start talking about, how to weave a sweater. They could start talking about, the structure of language. They could start talking poetry, right? It's like, how many, and before they say anything, all of that is there. It's like a library. It's like walking into the Library of Congress where all the books are there, but you're not reading any particular one, but they're all available. They're all right there. So there's that richness, that fullness. And when you don't specify a partiality, you have the whole thing, right? And qualifying is just like that. So when you say something, when you say in your mind that's a wall, you're taking something. That's like taking the dictionary with 100,000, 200,000 words in it, and picking out this one word wall and holding it up. Just because you've done that, the other 199,000 words are still there. Just because you aren't holding them up, they're just as relevant. See what I mean? So there's an inconceivable richness in experience that only gets censored when you pin it down, when you claim it to be this or that.
Yeah, I think that's what maybe that's sort of what's happening. I've had enough experience, I internally know that there's something really more. And it's really
it's palpable. It's so obvious. It's so luscious.
Well, yeah. So, and it's just like, how like when you go to optometrists and they have those lenses and they're clicking.
Yeah.
It's sort of like that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this, probably the very, very easiest mode of noticing is just feel the richness of experience. Just whatever. Don't worry about what that even means. Just feel rich. Just feel this richness. It's right here, right now. It's always right here. This experience is incredibly rich. And you can't possibly say what it is. As soon as you start saying, in fact, you stop noticing the richness and you start focusing on this, that, or the other. But the richness is like all the library with none of the books open. They're all there. It's like a conversation that hasn't started yet. It could be anything. It could be about anything. So it's all there. It's everything. It's there. And experience is intrinsically that. It's just this incredible fullness and richness. And it's palpable. This is not a philosophy or a concept. It's like it's like a nectar. It's just this juicy, this magnetic field of all of the richness, the flavors of experience.
I get the last bit.
Thanks very much. More sugar. More sugar, but a little chai, please.
A little chai. Okay.
Feels like even the sense of a sort of subject, there's also something else in experience.
Of course. And that, like everything else, that arises in a context of richness, which is more and other than that. Everything, whatever it is, no matter how seemingly personal or psychological or anything it is, arises like an island rising out of a sea. But the whole sea's still there just because the islands come out.
I'm going to bring this quote next week. I was watching one of the latest Neil deGrasse Tyson, The Cosmos.
Mm.
And he says he's out there in this incredible spectacle. And I can't remember. I'll have to bring it in. I meant to. But he says, wherever you are in the universe, it's always like you're the center and this compass can't be found. And then he went on, this is the part where I have to bring it next week. He said, even that's a lie. He said, it's a sense of subjectivity that didn't really exist. I get what he said. It was pretty cool.
The scientists are getting hip, eh?
Yeah.
Who'd have thought?
And I think physics has become so mind-blowing. It's like, well, now we don't know anything.
Yeah.
Now we're really lost. That's where they are.
Yeah. I just read a really good book which goes into that and lays it out very, very clearly. Yeah, exactly. You know, the current state of scientific theory is there is absolutely no bedrock.
Yeah.
You know, they used to think, well, space and speed of light is a constant, or space is a constant, or time is a constant. But all these things, they pierce these veils of all these things that are supposedly constant, supposedly, you know, some kind of a bedrock, something that it actually is a certain way. And now everything's up for grabs.
They can't hold it. They can't hold it.
Yeah.
There's no theory that can hold it at this point. It's great.
Yeah. No, it is great because they're getting here. I mean, that's how it is. That's
shows
what
they're really looking at.
Yeah, no, these are bright guys, you know. Some of these scientists are not total jerks.
Well, they're not just working for the drug companies.
Well, most of them are. Some of them aren't.
The astrophysicists are.
No.
Yeah, they're trippers.
They're 21 pages.
So is the nature of consciousness or awareness a one thing that might be a standard or a given or a ground, or is that amorphous and changing?
It is the absolute. It is actual, but it's not anything in particular, because it can't be resolved. It can't be found. So I mean, this is the paradox of all this. This is actual. What's here is actual. This is real. This is really real. This is not unreal. This is as real as it gets. But it's not anything in particular. So that's just paradoxical as hell. I mean, that's confusing. You can't make sense of it. But it doesn't make sense, so there's no surprise you can't make sense of it. It's not rational. So this is consciousness. There's nothing here but consciousness, and yet you can't find consciousness, so there is no consciousness. And yet there's nothing but, and this is it. And it's actual. And that's the absolute. The absolute is that there is no absolute. But that's the absolute. It cancels itself out without actually canceling anything.
Is the consciousness, is the knowing?
What about it?
Is the absolute.
Sure, the knowing is the absolute, but the knowing isn't even really knowing, because the knowing is also unknowing. It's not. It doesn't resolve. Nothing resolves. There is nothing which actually is any even way. Everything partakes of this quality, and when you look for it, you don't find anything in particular. Nothing is resolvable.
But the looking seems like an absolute.
Yes, it is. All of these things are absolutes, but none of them are things. Looking is an absolute, but you can't find any looking, because they transcend themselves. Consciousness is an absolute, but you can't find any consciousness. The knowing is an absolute, but you can't find any knowing. Which is not to cancel it out. It sounds like I'm canceling it out or erasing it, but I'm not. The knowing is an absolute, but you can't find it. And that's the absolute. That it can't be found is what it is. Turtles all the way down.
I can find it by experiencing it.
Yes, it's real. You can experience it. But when you experience it, what exactly is happening? When you go looking for that, it doesn't erase it, it doesn't cancel it. It's real, it's actual, but it doesn't get anywhere. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't arrive anywhere.
Well, I don't have to find it.
Well, no, you don't have to find it.
I mean, it's like...
It doesn't go away, so you don't need to find it.
I mean, it's like any emotions, like
Sure.
love or hate. Or,
Sure.
Those
Yeah.
are things that are present,
Yes.
but you can't see it or you can't find it.
Right. And that's what everything is. Everything is present, but you can't find it. Everything is radiant presence, as I would put it. It's present, and it radiates in the sense that it seems to have qualities. It seems to show up as experiential qualities, or as a power of knowing, or as consciousness, or as whatever. But when you go try and find any of it, you can't find it. It's real, it's there, it's actual, but you can't find it, because not finding it is the nature of what it is. It's that's what I mean by transcendental. Transcendental means completely irrationally weird, bizarre.
What would be more subtle than consciousness? The Maharaj talked about prior to consciousness, and I've heard clear light described as even more subtle than mind, at least in some conventional sense. Would it be more like the context of awareness?
Well, yes, except that again, you can't. That's not even an absolute, because when you go look at the context, you find the content.
Right.
Whenever you look at it, you find something else. Nothing resolved. So there's no actual stratification. There's no actual this and that. There's no actual demarcation. You can say, yeah, the absolute prior to is a clear light. But then when you go look for the clear light, you find all this.
Right. The mirror and the
So this is the clear light. So
yeah.
it's completely paradoxical. It never settles into an actual transcendental that's over there, away from all this, because it's non-dual.
Here it is, yeah.
This is it. When you go look for the most subtle, you end up finding the most coarse as well. But when you go looking for the most coarse, you find the most subtle, so figured. Because nothing is any particular way. And whatever it seems to be at first, when you look at it, it transcends being that. So you go look at the coarse, and it turns out not to be coarse, it turns out to be subtle. Then you go looking at the subtle, it turns out not to be subtle. And then where are you?
That's why Longevity is so anti-strategy.
Yeah.
It's not about going inward or...
Yeah. Because as long as you're holding that there is an inward to go, you're in delusion. That very concept is separating you from the way it actually is. Because that concept makes too much sense. And the way it is makes absolutely no sense. Sorry?
What are you left with?
Everything.
Can't say. That's the point. You can't say. You're left with Tuesday night in SanRafael at Open Secret, drinking chai, which is another word for absolute transcendental infinity. Yeah.
I was fooling around today with this sort of thing. I was taking a nap, and then I woke up from the nap, but I didn't open my eyes. But then I was like aware of this, radiance, and then aware that I'm aware of the radiance without me doing anything. It's just there. I'm seeing it.
Sure.
And then I was hanging out in that for a long time, and then I started slowly opened my eyes and looked at the room, and then tried to see how what I was seeing in the room, so to speak, was the same thing as the radiance I was looking at before.
Right.
And it's really interesting because the radiance is sort of like always there, but it's not, it's sort of ubiquitous or something.
Yeah.
If I look at any supposed object in the room, when I open my eyes, I know that that's the radiance, but I don't see that radiance coming out of it, so to speak.
No, but that is the radiance.
Yeah, right, for sure.
That's what the radiance can look like. Anything. It's inconceivably weird.
Yeah, right.
It can look like nothing. It can look like anything. It can look like everything.
Yeah, right.
And yet it's always exactly itself. It looks like anything with all these seemings, but it never actually becomes anything other than itself.
Yeah, because
I mean, if you lock on to sort of the most primordial sense of radiance that you have, I mean, that's really nothing in a certain, I mean, it's something, but
Sure.
I mean, there's no definition in it.
Sure.
And then you pull more and more stuff, more and more definitional stuff into your consciousness, but it's still that.
Yeah,
It
of course.
couldn't be any other thing than
Yeah,
that.
because it doesn't actually stabilize in any of these conditions. When you go to the absolute subtlest virtual nothing
Right.
of the radiance, it isn't actually that.
Right.
It's because that is a slippery. That's not something that actually stabilizes or settles down. That's slippery, and what it slips into is something other than that, and all of a sudden you're wherever.
You're looking at a room or something.
Yeah, whatever. You're looking at God knows what.
Right.
I mean, waking turns to sleep, sleep turns to dream, dream turns to waking, this moment turns to this moment, and it's just always just slipping away, slipping. And it always looks like something, but you can never say exactly what it looks like.
Right, yeah. And you can't say what the radiance looks like either.
No, it looks like it's all the radiance. The radiance looks like all of it.
Yeah. Well, that slipping away quality too. I've been playing with that. I mean,
Yeah, that's a very easy contact point for noticing. It's just the continual slipping away of the present moment.
Yeah, because you think you're going towards something, and it's just always, it's like a dream. It never resolves. It's just, you're not going to get there.
Yeah.
You're just like, you're not going to get it.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah, exactly. I've been thinking of that Paul Simon song, Slip Sliding Away.
Yeah, I've been singing that.
The nearer your destination, the more you slip sliding away.
Yeah, right. And it's just to know that you're not going to get it.
Yeah.
It's really, really interesting.
Because there's no it to get, and yet not getting it is getting it.
Right.
Because it is that which doesn't get it.
Yeah, right.
It is that which is not anything in particular.
Right.
Well, seeming to be anything.
And that nature, again, just to stay with the earlier theme of clear light, that's indestructible. That cannot be, no obscuration, no
Right.
even lowest relative experience has never touched it.
Right, because it is that. It can't be tainted by itself. Clear light can't be tainted by clear light, and everything is made of clear light. So the so-called lower realms are just a misunderstanding of the clear light.
There's a gross experience.
Gross experience is a misunderstanding of clear light. So it consists of nothing but clear light. So how could it taint itself? It's like a forest being blocked by the trees. It can't happen.
This is fascinating. You're communicating, Shuttle is communicating, like the lotus, the image of the lotus comes out of the mud but was never painted. Dzogchen is a direct pointing to that, not relying on method because there's also, it's not external, it's not something that has to
Yes,
be.
exactly. And any method has to be imagined because there is actually nothing external. And so by imagining it, you're actually, going through the motions of departing from it. Not that you can actually depart from it, but you're pretending to depart from it by going to a structure that doesn't actually exist. So you're adding something superfluous, or pretending to. So what's the point? How does that help anything out? Better just let go and see where you are. No process, no method, no nothing. And yet that is the most efficient process and the most efficient method. Because then when you let go of everything, what do you have? Just this, that is, it engaged with itself. And its engagement with itself is, you have God on your side because it's hyper-intelligent, hyper-functional, hyper-transcendental cities engaging with itself. And that's what this experience is, and it becomes more and more apparent that is the case. And then it's all just, the clear light dancing with itself, and you are that, and everything is that, and it's just, and that's in fact what it has always been, and that's just completely obvious. But the less you try and get a hold of it, the more you have it, because it doesn't have any hold of itself. But of course it doesn't need any hold of itself because it never loses itself.
It seems as if a lot of the teachings do talk about actual experience of clear light.
Sure.
Clear light. As clear light.
Sure. But as clear light, you have to know what the clear light is. Clear light is not literally a light, and it's not literally clear. That's a euphemism.
Like isness.
Yeah, it's the isness, which is very actual, and which turns out to be everything. And yet, it's very meaningful and profound to call it clear light, because it's absolutely unstained, absolutely unsullied, absolutely unblocked. But the problem with all these teachings and all these ways of putting it is that it suggests implications of it. It may be a certain way, and the problem with that is the inference that if it's a certain way, then maybe that means it's not some other way, and that's not. It's not like that. It's every way, or no way.
Oh, okay.
that really helps, doesn't it?
Let me just read something very quickly. I appreciate your
Sure.
commentary on it. It won't take very long.
Mm-hmm.
Some Mahamudra instructors and practitioners assert that the clarity and cognition of the mind are directly perceived without the veil of conceptualization. Then the meditator has realized the emptiness that is the ultimate nature of the mind. They claim that this clarity and cognition is the mind's ultimate nature, and the students of such instructors also fall into this mistaken view. This misconception arises from the fact that those who hold this wrong belief do not understand the perfect view as it is explained by Nagarjuna. They do not properly understand what ultimate true nature means. When it asks what the ultimate nature of the mind is, they cannot establish it as being a non-affirming negation. They think that the ultimate nature of the mind is clarity and cognition free of conceptualization. They do not realize that the ultimate nature of the mind is a non-affirming negation that is the mere absence of the inherent existence of the mind. This mere absence of inherent existence is very subtle, and therefore quite difficult to comprehend.
Right.
The clarity and cognition of the mind, however, is not nearly as subtle, and thus relatively easy to understand.
Right. Yeah, that's. I mean, basically, that's the theme of our whole talk tonight. When I talked about the picture that's made of dots, the dots are made of dots, and so on and so forth. You can't find the picture because when you go looking for it, it deconstructs into something else, which deconstructs into something else, which deconstructs into something else forever. So there's no picture. It's not anything. It's not. It never resolves as anything.
That is another way of saying the absence of inherent existence.
Exactly. But it's not a simple absence. It's not a simple non-existence. It's actual. But it's actual as nothing in particular, while seeming to be any and everything in particular.
But there's something else that what he's saying about the clarity and this quasi-realization.
Right. But that because and the reason why that is a lesser condition is because it's imagining a final, an ultimate condition that is final, that is ultimate, and there is no such thing. Turtles all the way down. There's no bottom layer.
I guess that would perhaps imply an subject, an ultimate subject would be.
Yeah, it may imply all that stuff, but it creates. I mean, the absolute is emptiness. If you want to put it in those terms, and emptiness does not mean non-existence. Emptiness is actual, but it's the actuality of complete unresolvability. Nothing resolves into being anything in particular.
Right, inherent existence, I guess.
Yeah, that's what that means. Inherent existence means, by inherent existence, they mean resolving into something in particular, something that something ultimately is.
Oh, that's right, that's right.
It exists, but there's no it that exists. Because when you're looking for an it's like a mirage. It disappears in front of you. But the mirage exists, but it exists as a mirage, not as an it.
Yeah, it's the same.
Yeah.
On the same page.
Yeah, of course. And but again, even that is too heavy-handed because it can't be put at all. And the most artful way of putting it is wrong. Simply because it does not actually comprehensively convey what this is. It may vaguely imply it by innuendo. That's the best you can do.
Right.
But it's an inherent inaccuracy.
I get that. It has to be known.
Yeah. And yet, even though it is completely transcendental and beyond conceiving of, beyond modeling in the mind, beyond conception, it is knowable, and it is knowable with absolute profundity and clarity, because even though its very nature is transcendental, the faculty that knows it is also transcendental. So what in you is knowing experience is completely transcendental, and so has absolutely inconceivable irrational properties, functionalities, and is quite capable of knowing this astounding condition exactly as it is, even though you can never put it into words clearly, because it's beyond words. But it can be known. I mean, this is the important point. This yoga is doable. It's actual. It's reasonable. It's not fleeting.
And like the lotus, it's right in the middle of the so-called mud and obscuration.
Yeah. But the lotus is even a sloppy example, because in that example the mud is other than the lotus. The lotus is the mud. The mud is the lotus.
The radiance,
Yeah. The radiance can't block itself, and there's nothing but radiance. So how can the radiance be blocked? Because anything to block it would have to be radiance, because there's nothing else. So the most vile, horrible, deluded, perverse qualities of energy are actually radiance.
Hence the name of your book, Dirty Enlightenment.
Yeah, exactly so. Even the dirt is radiance. The obscurations are radiance. I mean, that's the primal point. There's no either or. It's not like getting away from something to get to something else. It's greater than that.
If I get sort of, get a beat on radiance, and hang out with it for a while, I mean, before, let's say, I was sleeping and napping, I wasn't aware of it. So that means that the radiance can not look like itself.
Absolutely.
I mean, the radiance can look like...
It can look like unconsciousness.
Unconsciousness, yeah.
Yeah.
So besides looking like all this, it can actually look like unconsciousness on top of everything.
It can look like anything. When I say it can look like anything, I mean anything.
Right. Yeah.
Including nothing.
Yeah. Pretty wild.
But it never is anything other than exactly itself. Whatever it looks like is completely irrelevant. Because what is actually happening here is always exactly the same thing. Nothing is ever added or taken away.
And you can't get away from it.
Can't get away from it. There's no way. And yet it can literally look like anything. You know, it can look like sleep, it can look like dream, it can look like death, it can look like success, it can look like failure, it can look like egoic fixation, it can look like, you know, blissful meditation. But all these are just you know, mirages of radiance.
Like your painting, it can't be resolved.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point. It can't be resolved. There's whatever it seems to be. It's not actually that, because when you look closely, you can't actually find what it seems to be.
Right, and radiance is the only thing that exists. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean,
There's nothing but.
it's only that. I mean, there's no
Yeah.
God or whatever. That is the highest.
Well, that's everything. Radiant presence is what there is.
Right.
You know, there's one thing here, although it's not one and it's not a thing, but there's
Right,
only
yeah.
one thing here.
They're always having sort of like darshan with the absolute.
Yeah, totally.
I mean,
This
no
is
matter
it.
what you're doing, I mean, well,
Yeah.
you're consciously having it like, I feel it, but even when you
Because-
don't feel it.
Yeah,
it's there.
because there's nothing here but Shiva dancing with Shiva.
Right, yeah,
And so it's Shiva darshan 24/7, because
right,
what's seeing your experience is Shiva, and what's being seen is Shiva.
right.
Period. I mean, like blank, absolute statement. So yeah, how can there be anything other than Shiva darshan?
Right.
I don't remember if it was Gaudapada, I think it was a contemporary, possibly or Shankara, but one of them refuted the Buddhist teaching of the two truths. That there's only one without a second period.
Oh yeah. The two truths is an absurdity. You know, but even Dzogchen shoots down two truths. Two truths is an artifact of philosophers.
What was it?
Huh?
Could you talk about the two trees? I don't remember.
What the two truths are?
Yeah.
Two truths are, supposedly there's a relative truth and an absolute truth. And according to that theory, the absolute truth is what it is, but you have to deal with the relative truth.
It was that the absolute truth was seeing through the relative. Relative was the way of recognizing absolute truth.
No, because the problem is then it would collapse. If it was recognizing absolute truth, then it would collapse, which is what it is. I mean, that's how I would put it. Relative truth is just a misunderstanding of absolute truth. And that misunderstanding is itself absolute truth, because it's the absolute that's doing the misunderstanding. So the whole relative truth just collapses, except as an assertion. This only exists in logic. Can't actually find anything new.
Once you know it, you know there's only one truth.
Yeah, there's one condition that happens one way, and it includes everything. So, you know, how many? That's the truth.
No, I guess the relative truth is that you are such a being, and you have covered obscurations.
Yeah, right, all that stuff. You know, and none of that is actually the case.
That actually, the truth is one has never been a such a being.
No, there's never been any such thing. That's just a big misunderstanding. It's an assumption that is held erroneously in the imagination to be objectively true, on evidence that is wrong. Because if you look closely at, again, I mean, like what I started talking about tonight, if you look closely at phenomena, you can't find, and none of the patterns resolve into coherence. And any interpretation of anything being a certain way depends upon that pattern that it consists of actually being resolvable as definitively being that way. And nothing experientially exists in that way whatsoever. because any experiential pattern does not resolve. When you look at it closely, you can't find it. You can't find what it is. And in fact, it morphs into completely other patterns, and each of those morphs into other ones, and so it completely diverges, and what you started looking for is just long gone. It's like when you look for a mirage again, the mirage just disappears. Mm-hmm. All interpretations are oversimplifications. And if you look at actual experiential phenomena, they are always infinitely complex and unresolvable. So any simplification of that creates a caricature of it that is other than the thing itself.
I don't know, I guess a lot of the additional stuff, they would see it perhaps as a necessary caricature or a structure that one takes on and goes beyond.
Sure. Well, that's the argument, but again, it's inefficient, so why bother? Since it's not even there, why deal with it at all?
And I guess that's what Dzogchen distinction or.
Dzogchen says it's not there, it's primal radiance, so yeah.
It has a
cut to the chase.
It has a very different, the word rasa?
Yeah, of course.
Flavor,
sure.
Very different from Theravada.
Oh yeah, very different. It's very different. Because it starts, Dzogchen, is said to use the goal as the path. So Dzogchen starts with transcendence. It starts with the transcendental. The transcendental is not some carrot on a string that you're working towards. Your very method is the transcendental. The concrete presence of the transcendental becomes the vehicle that you use to explore and discover the transcendental.
Right.
So using the goal as the path.
In the traditional Pali Buddhism, which is Theravada, is based on that you are impeccably mindful, you practice moment to moment, and noticing of your breath, whatever.
Right.
And in time, you'll be the glimpse of the opposition. So it is presented as a goal in the future.
Right, exactly. And Dzogchen cuts to the chase and says, as soon as you start noticing your breath, both the noticing and the breath are completely transcendental. The noticing is not simply noticing, and the breath is not simply breath. And you can see what they actually are, and you won't be able to say what that is, but you're gone. You're in unresolvability, which is the final condition. And it's also the initial condition, conveniently. Unresolvability is your starting point and your end point. How convenient.
Well,
start the race at the finish line.
Well, it's interesting how so many of the faith traditions actually have resolvability as its starting point.
Yeah.
And then you have to work backwards from that, which never really...
Well, they have to have that in order to have a tradition.
Mm-hmm.
In order to even have a tradition, you have to assert some kind of resolvability, so you have some principles for it to be based on. I mean, this is a non-tradition. This is just the simple being of the present moment as it is, which can hardly be said to be a tradition. It's a simple fact, the fact. I expect all of you here know about it, or most of you anyway. There's a retreat we're doing here on the weekend here at Okasika in June. There's a little poster about it over there. If you hadn't heard about it and you might have some interest in that, you can check that out.
Can you talk about the difference between searching and noticing?
Searching again, obviously implies that there's something that's being searched for, and it's the assumption that that something is somehow either not here or not recognized or not in possession, and also that there's someone who can search it, and that there's some benefit to be gained by doing this searching, something to be acquired, something to achieve. Whereas noticing is simply noticing what is already the case. So you're not looking for anything in particular, and you're not trying to achieve some goal that is not present and had. And
but if you can't notice what is, you're searching.
But
if you're
the very nature of not noticing what is supposing that you're not noticing what is, which is the nature of the problem.
That's exactly right.
Noticing is actually a complete trick. There's no such thing. Noticing is what's already happening, and noticing as a practice, so-called, is a Trojan horse, is a trick to seduce one into noticing that one is already noticing, and it has always been doing nothing but.
So, I was thinking about this today. You actually have to stop searching to notice.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
yet, until you notice, you can't help but search, unless
Right.
you don't care.
Right. So this is why entry into noticing is always a trick. Which is why we spend in these meetings and such. We spend so much time talking about these tricks and aspects, and none of which actually accomplish anything, but any of which may be sufficient to disorient one enough to find themselves out of their frame of reference, at which point they'll notice that they're noticing.
You have the good fortune of being tripped up on your road to finding something.
Yeah.
I was curious, since we're talking so much about Tibetan Buddhism, the mind-only school. Could you talk about the debate there?
I don't know that much about that formally,
Yeah,
so I couldn't really address
and I
it.
forget.
Yeah.
I used to know, but what's that?
Well, the Chittamatras.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember the details of their position philosophically, what differentiates it from the other ones, but there's a lot of fundamental. Michael, do you happen to know that?
Yeah, this guy actually talks about it, not so much in this book, but in another book.
Yeah.
The Chittamatras are actually very close to Dzogchen.
Yeah, they have four views, and the first two views are realist views, and they posit some relative reality to matter and so forth, physicality elements, and then the Shinamatra view posits a reality to consciousness, which what they consider the pinnacle, the Madhyamaka Sangha view, which is the view we're talking about here, is that even that would be a conception that there's no thing, including consciousness, which exists ultimately. Everything is imputed by conception of this thing. So that's briefly.
He said also that they're making concretion mind, that mind exists.
Right,
That's
right.
yeah.
And in science, they're going beyond quantum mechanics even now, and talking about there's no matter.
Yeah, everything appears from a certain perspective, and there's no privileged perspective. There's no absolute perspective. So from a certain perspective, there can be seen to be matter. From another certain perspective, there can seem to be, all these various conditions. And yet, these conditions all basically transform into each other. Matter turns out to be energy, but energy turns out to be matter. And so, you can see it as energy, you can see it as matter, and there's no basis for a bias of one being weighted as having any more priority than the other. And all of these quantities turn out to be completely interchangeable. So it goes in a circle with no starting point, which is very appropriate because that's close to the actual condition. That's the whole point. That is discoverable was that this does not resolve into anything, and yet it is actual, and it is as it is, which happens to be completely unresolvable. Which is, completely unresolvable, which is a very interesting state of affairs. And it turns out to be a delightful state of affairs from the point of view of bondage and suffering and confusion and all that, because that state of affairs translates into absolute liberation when one really gets the implications of it.
Do you ever wonder why consciousness appears as so much ignorance?
It's unfathomable. It's its process, if it had a process.
Yeah.
This is its dance.
Yeah.
And so to speak, if it was a dance.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not resolvable. So of course the question is unanswerable. But it's interesting that it does what it does. And yet even in doing what it's doing, it doesn't really do anything because everything it seems to be doing actually turns out not to be that. So it's all just endlessly strange.
It ultimately never departs from its own nature, period.
Exactly, never departs from itself. It can look like anything, it can seem to be anything, but it never departs from itself. It's always exactly this. And on that note, I wish you all a lovely evening.
All right. And how do we know that the Nazis aren't liberating those women and children?